Hey, Sunder Studios here. Okay, so I wanted to make a quick video talking about this interesting topic. Fair warning, it might involve me simply reading Reddit posts and just giving my own musings on them, but it's a very interesting topic. It is sex and anarchy and the intersection of the two. Now, a lot of this, I imagine the most appropriate answers to them would be in feminist theory, which I'll admit I am kind of underread in, but I'm more sort of viewing it through the lens of hierarchy, which I think generally falls within anarchist theory, and I've read a fair bit of that. So, essentially, I posted to the Anarchy 101 subreddit, sex! Exclamation point, and anarchy, because sex sells, even in an anarchist society. So interesting moral/anarchist policy question, is natural variation in subjective attractiveness a form of hierarchy? Hopefully, without the cosmetics industry destroying women's self-image. By the way, Killing Them Softly is an excellent documentary you ought to check out. And much of pop culture turning men to isolated, angry, self-loathing lone wolves. Sexual relations between all genders will hopefully be a lot more free and chill in an anarchist society than it is today. Or at least I should have written that out in my original post. Whatever. However, it is pretty clear that those with a lot of culturally current attractive features like symmetry, height, secondary sex traits have a lot of sway over those who are attracted to them. So could or should this be addressed in an anarchist society trying to eliminate hierarchy? And then I had an edit because it was sort of necessary. Just to clarify, I don't think trying to force different attractions is an even remotely acceptable solution. Part of what makes this question interesting to me is it's very resistant to So, to frame it another way, I've sort of had to reframe the question a few times in responses because there were a lot of questions and there was sort of a lot of assumptions that I was coming at this from an incel-y place. I'm not, or at least I'm not trying to. I guess it's sort of a start of a broader question about things that do cause influence within social groups, but which are not directly addressed by some of the core tenets of anarchy. And it's not me trying to throw a wrench in it. I think anarchy is by far the best way forward for the planet if we can achieve it before billionaires essentially kill us all through a climate catastrophe. But it is something that is a pretty consistent form of power, I'd say. If you define power as the ability to convince people to do things they otherwise would not, or to coerce them, where, there aren't explicit consequences, but there are social ones. Or where, essentially where you can significantly bias someone's judgment due to sort of social systems and your relation to them in those social systems. It's kind of a messy definition, I guess, and so maybe I'm not the best person to answer this. So I guess I'd like to go through the comments, and I think a lot of them are brilliant takes, and I want to sort of go over what people seem to think on this. And as a bonus, near the end, I also had a post to r/196, which is a lovely subreddit. It's unmoderated, but surprisingly it's not full of hate speech. Not unmoderated, but there are no posting rules. So not full of hate speech despite that. And I posted one about sex work and how it's sort of valid, and you gotta support the workers. If not the work itself, because the work itself of sex work, in my opinion, presents some troubling things with consent, right? It's obviously a coercive thing to have money around sex, especially in a society that requires money to live. And there was a brilliant post by someone sort of commenting on all this, even though it wasn't explicitly in the post I made on 196. He just sort of happened to come up with essentially anarchist theory as a philosopher, so I'll bring that up later. Right, so the first comment, the highest rated one, around 100 upvotes, could/should this be addressed in an anarchist society trying to eliminate hierarchy? While there are undoubtedly cultural aspects to what and whom a given person finds attractive, there's also undoubtedly an innate character to it as well. In other words, we're attracted to what and whom we're attracted to, sometimes in spite of and sometimes because of acculturation. Obviously, there's a distinction between attractiveness and what specific cultural norms are of attractiveness, and on the other hand, what a person finds attractive, but there's also a lot of overlap on these two things. So how will we even begin to tease apart these two things without engaging in some form of coercion? Telling someone who else who they should be attracted to, though, that seems problematic. Absolutely, as I said above. And then we have a really interesting perspective from another fella here. He's responding to this previous guy. Well, since this is not safe for work already, I'll say that I'm a man who has always been turned on by hairy, unusually bearded men. A long joke that I've never gotten a tattoo, because the only thing I'd imagine having on my body for the rest of my life is Sam Elliott. I'm not sure if that's innate, but it is so much a part of my psyche that it feels like it is. However, for many long years, that attraction did not include black men. I justified that for a long time as black men tend to be smooth. Yeah, so what? But a couple of years ago, I finally acknowledged it as nothing but my own anti-black bigotry. I was looking at men, seeing blackness before anything else, and turning a blind eye to my racist upbringing that said blackness is unattractive. I disgusted myself, and rightly so. I dealt with that bigotry in myself and quickly discovered that, yeah, there are a whole lot of sexually attractive black men. Having beards come more into fashion helped, being around more black people helped, and well, Idris Elba and Chiwetel Ejiofor helped. It hasn't changed my behavior because I'm married and monogamous, but that wasn't really the point. All of this may say nothing more than that I'm a horny bastard, but I do think that it might show that our ideas of attractiveness are conditioned by our bigotry, and then changing the bigotry can change what turns us on. It doesn't change the social messages we get, however, because those are systemic, therefore racist, and ableist. And I absolutely agree with a lot of these takes. Telling people to change their tastes in any way would definitely be wrong. I tried to reframe the question here. I guess what I'm asking is, given that attraction can influence other people, are there any ethical ways to prevent that power from becoming coercive? I mentioned that for both guys and gals, I know, can sometimes act like doormats for people they're wildly attracted to. Perhaps that's a choice, but is it a totally free one, made without systemic or social consequences? And Stathow makes a good response too. I think the coercion is more from other cultural aspects. Yeah, if a guy was 180 centimeters instead of 170, they'd probably get more girls, gals, and guys, for that matter, liking them. But you not liking me is not coercion in and of itself. But if you need to find a partner because of societal pressures, then coercion comes into play. For example, in many cultures nowadays, a woman, and more her family, will not accept a marriage to a man unless he owns a home, while at the same time, those men are being pressured by their family and society to get married. So now society has placed this massive coercive force on men to buy a home at a young age. There are also other things that are partially biological, but now culture has manufactured a coercion, where, for example, biologically a woman would be able to have a child until mid to late 30s. Many cultures will start telling a woman to hurry up and find a partner as they're getting old in their mid-20s. Good point. Yeah, the intersection of like sort of actual reproduction and attraction is interesting too, right? Obviously no one has a right to anyone else's body, but reproduction's like pretty important to a lot of people. Not everyone, obviously, especially as the climate disaster gets worse. Hopefully, if we avert that, in a hypothetical anarchist society, I hope, we can sort of, I don't know, I honestly have no idea what the solutions could be apart from sort of transhumanist one, as they get into later in the thread, where we're sort of all uploaded to a singularity and our bodies are functionally nothing more than custom avatars. That would be perhaps ideal. Alright, Queer Sparrow says, personally, I think a difference in attraction itself is not a concern, but treating people differently in institutional ways is. I.e., finding someone more attractive than others is not an issue. Being more likely to hire someone you find attractive than someone you find unattractive is. The shape of this second issue would presumably be different in an anarchist society where access to basic needs is not tied up in a structural economy hierarchy. Stuff like, for instance, fat phobia, racism, ableism, and aspects which is widespread society treating people as worth less if they're perceived as less attractive could persist in an anarchist society, and I think it would be our responsibility to address that sort of behavior. I agree with that. I don't know how, but I agree. The place where it becomes complicated is where individual attraction is influenced by societal bias. I think it's responsible to ask people to question why they find things more or less attractive, but it's unenforceable and TBH undesirable to enforce to say that people shouldn't find any given thing more or less attractive. The solution to this is to tackle the society-level bias, thereby reducing its impact on individual preference. And I said, personally, I think this is the best answer in the thread so far. Still feel that way. Well said. Tackling the social bias would make it far less problematic. We got a lot of other people sort of agreeing with him. You know what? Let's hear him expanding. @Lewis says, this is amazingly put. About the second paragraph, I think it's generally pointless to ask people why they find things more or less attractive. I even thought about it myself, and all I could come up with is chemicals in my brain. I'm guessing what you were getting at was closer to why people have more or less value. However, the more I think about it, I'm starting to realize that what you mean because of the mentioning of social bias. Societal standards don't make logical or moral sense. However, it's almost subliminally pushed into people's attention towards others because I think maybe we want someone normal, and the standards of what's normal is idiotic maybe? I'm not disagreeing, but can you expand more on this? And Queer Sparrow does. What I'm thinking about when I say this is, 1, things that we know society instills bias over, like fatness. And 2, things we know society impresses stereotypes of, for instance, race, disability, trans people. Edit to add. Really, I'm not even sure I'd say these are distinct points. I'm just separating them for ease in my own explanation. It's true, they're sort of intersectional. I'm inclined to ask myself, am I feeling this because it's something I genuinely think or feel, or because this is how I've been told to think and feel, or some combination of the above, about pretty much everything? And I think that's a good thing to ask ourselves about attraction as well. For my first point, this is hard to tease out, and there may never be a clear answer, and even if there is a clear answer, it might not be something we can control. I think there's value in asking ourselves this, even if we don't have a clear answer. I agree. For my second point, it's important to recognize how we stereotype people, how it impacts our attraction, and when those stereotypes are causing us to misperceive people. For instance, I'm trans, and I've been exposed to a lot of people with the attitude, I would never date a trans person, I just don't find them attractive. And I certainly can't say that this is 100% of the time, but a lot of the time, this statement isn't based in experience, it's based on a stereotype. I have a stereotype in mind of what trans people are like, and I don't find that stereotype attractive, therefore I don't find any trans people attractive. I know these sorts of I don't find this stereotype attractive, therefore I don't find X group of people attractive sentiment occurs around race and disability too, and probably other areas as well. So I think it's worth asking ourselves whether we have other people in mind, actual people in mind, or stereotypes. Yeah, exactly. And again, hopefully that would be changed with some sort of more egalitarian anarchist social shift, but if it isn't, I think it is something that's worth considering because it is a form of power and has been used as a form of oppression in the past. Anonymous Rhombus says, people with a healthy, attractive, able bodies unfortunately do get treated as more competent. Fetishizing the working class contributes to this. Ableism is definitely a hierarchy. Totally agree with him. I think there's the able effect is sort of related to that, which is where one positive quality gets attributed to others as well. So the way this is usually applied is honestly to attractiveness, or to attractive traits like being tall for guys, or like breast to hip ratio for women, basically, at least in Western societies. What it comes down to is if you've got high acceptable factors in those traits to your culture, people are going to assume positive qualities spill over to other traits, which, isn't always true, and maybe is beside the point if we're trying to run an egalitarian society that fulfills people's needs equally. But it is an important social bias, I think, and especially in like a society that will be held together much more so, I'd say, by social connections between people. It's something I think at least worth talking about. Here to upvote says, how do you mean fetishizing the working class? I'm not trying to be dismissive, just curious. Which he responds, mostly something that communists do, but anarchists obviously aren't immune to. Yeah, communists can, tankies especially, can be bad about this. The working class as a category doesn't necessarily include the old, the young, the sick, the disabled, the lazy. Therefore, to talk about the working class is to exclude the least able-bodied people of society. Basilica Chopin, I didn't read this until just now, said, pictures of grease-stained chads holding hammers in diesel punk style are the big titty goth GFs of Marxism-Leninism. This is what you're talking about? Yeah, no, that's so true. Well put. Obviously what we need are grease-stained big titty goth girls holding hammers in a diesel punk style. That's true. This so much. Another user said, this so much. The fetishism of the working class, particularly of those in factory physical labor jobs, but also the demonization of those who didn't feel comfortable protesting, turned me off of communists big time as someone with an invisible disability. Building a hierarchy where the working class are on top isn't going to help everybody, but destroying all hierarchies will. True. And yeah, this is, to her point, I do think this can be a mild form of informal hierarchy. Had an argument with a guy in r/soc once. It took like 4 comments back and forth for him to realize that I was saying that some persons with difficult disabilities can't work. And then he was like, oh well, I mean, of course we'll give them welfare. The whole context of the conversation was arguing for fundamental human rights based on one's capacity for labor. Infuriating. True. Yeah, a lot of sort of collectivists in the Proudhon school, as opposed to the Kropotkin school, seem to be under the impression that like reforming wage labor with like labor tickets is acceptable. I disagree. Yeah. Don't worry, guys. Another he says, quote, don't worry, guys. We'll give you weekly checks or something. Who even needs human rights when you have our word? We'll give you charity. Stop being a counter-revolutionary. Jesus. Yeah, come on. Also, another user suggests you might be interested in the work of Reclaim Other, which I recommend to everybody. I haven't personally checked it out. It might be cool, though. I trust him. Another user says, people with healthy, attractive, able bodies unfortunately do get treated as more competent. Fetishizing the working class. Oh, wait. Doy, I just read that. I am sorry. I'm a dumbass. See, look, I might be discriminated against for being a dumbass, even in a more egalitarian society. I do hope anarchy would be better than that. How would one go about this? This raises some potentially incredibly problematic views, which could lead to even more problematic solutions. To which I essentially said I had no clue. The responses to that, though, are quite interesting. My response was very cool. One person says, I think an anarchist society or even a commune should always tear down beauty standards and making attraction something that comes genuinely from the individual and their subjective experiences. So yeah, I guess it is an issue that would need to be tackled, but just sort of not ever from a policy lens, just from a cultural one, which I think is valid. Miller JC says, I don't think the general thesis is problematic because it's very clearly true. I don't like reading that. It confirms my bias. Life is easier for attractive people. This is what I feel. But again, you know, we live in a capitalist society, so a lot of these things are biased by where we live. But in my opinion, this is something that could very easily be hijacked by lunatic incels or reactionaries, and their solution would just be eugenics. True, or worse. And because I used to be one of those people, sadly me too, my thoughts immediately went to breed attractive people out of existence, which, besides being absolutely evil, just wouldn't work. But that doesn't stop the right wing. Yeah. So I don't think this is something that has or will have a solution. Biology is gonna biology, and people are gonna favor who they want to favor, and that very often goes hand in hand with Western beauty standards, at least speaking as an American. Not everything is directly capitalism's fault. And I suppose you could do some kind of affirmative action kind of thing where it comes to matters like employment, but even then I don't think it's that simple. Yeah, absolutely. We have another user saying, didn't Proudhon and Bakunin write about how the issue with hierarchy was when it was unnatural and socially enforced? Someone being born faster, prettier, or smarter than others doesn't strike me as a kind of hierarchy anarchists usually oppose or care about. After all, individuals are unique. Yeah, good point. That's a totally valid point of view, too. And yeah, I certainly see where you're coming from with that. I guess the only thing that separates it from like other traits like being fast or smart, even assuming general intelligence is a thing, which I don't, is, I would say, attraction. It can be kind of constant, the standards that people are held to, at least in a culture, and hopefully this is less of an issue with anarchism. But if it privileges one group of people over others, I mean, you would hope that the systems of anarchism would decrease the amount of effect and any sort of attractive bias would have. And I think it probably will, to be honest. This might just be a moot question, but I'm sort of treating it as more of a scholarly. I hope people in North Carolina, most of them are, it seems. One reporter's opinion, very insightfully, says, sex, now that I have your attention. Which is so true. That's how you do it. Another user says, the funny thing is, my unhealthy fascination with incel ideology is probably one of the major things that turned me into an anarchist, which is fascinating. The thing that still strikes me about incels is how everyone makes it so clear they despise them, and yet most people seem to basically agree with the mechanics of how incels think people work. That is, society revolves around physical attractiveness, and a man's value is attached to the ease with which he can have sex with women and how attractive these women are. Men display attractiveness not just by being fit and naturally good-looking, but also by being assertive, funny, and wealthy. If you don't have any of these qualities, you're worthless and you deserve nothing. Go to any club on a Friday night in any city, and it immediately becomes pretty obvious that this is not a totally unique view to incels, basically because everyone in that type of environment is thinking that way. From the losers in the corner to the rich kids getting bottle service to the hottest girls there. It's all operating according to a strict hierarchy. The more people who want to have sex with you, the more important you are. The way incels articulate it is often ludicrous and bathed in misogyny. But then, other times I do find it to be shockingly perceptive, and their misogyny more so resulting from their internalization of the values of a deeply misogynistic society, one implicitly embraced by many men and women we'd consider very attractive. To a large extent, people condemn incels as strongly as they do, because in doing so places them on a higher position in the hierarchy both they and the incels believe in. That's the thing, though. Hierarchies exist relative to any given value. The thing to question isn't the hierarchy. There's no question whatsoever that most people will consider Brad Pitt more sexually appealing than Danny DeVito. Maybe I'm in the minority. I'll admit it. Danny DeVito's, can't question the trash man. The thing to question is the value on which the hierarchy depends. Why do we believe in it? Is Brad Pitt a better person than Danny DeVito? Should Brad Pitt be more satisfied with his life than Danny DeVito? Why should Danny DeVito care if Brad Pitt's more sexually attractive than him anyway? Is it Danny DeVito's ambition in life to be able to sleep with any girl he wants? It certainly doesn't seem that way. Here it becomes obvious that while there is a hierarchy, if you fixate on this single perspective in life, in reality, life is incredibly complicated. I read that with the wrong emphasis. Here it becomes obvious that while there is a hierarchy, if you fixate on a single perspective in life, in reality, life is incredibly complicated, and people have all kinds of roles to play and all kinds of potentials, which may or may not conform to a hierarchy we happen to think is important. It's not so much that Danny DeVito has other qualities which make him as good or better than Brad Pitt, but that Danny DeVito's life is not about living up to the hierarchy in which Brad Pitt is better than him. Danny DeVito's life is about being a good Danny DeVito. I just love how many times he uses the word Danny DeVito. Whatever that may mean for him, given his own set of ethics, principles, and potentials. And that's how we find ourselves at Anarchy, the wonderful world of rich possibilities in which you can decide for yourself what matters to you, not simply fixating on what you're told makes you a successful human being. Fuck other people's hierarchies. To adhere to them is dreadfully boring. In that sense, it's a hierarchy I believe we can and should eliminate. Another comrade says, I know your point, but I just want to say Danny DeVito is a comrade. True! And on that basis, incalculably more attractive than Brad Pitt, who seems like a super basic, toxic, masked but sad jerk, TBH. Yeah, I saw an interview with Danny DeVito talking about the British Labour Party, which was quite cool. And just generally from the show, It's Always Sunny, it seems extremely leftist. I would like to do a video talking about that, because it's one of my favorite shows of all time. There's also a fascinating article written about it that I could maybe narrate or give my commentary on, or essentially do a response to. I don't know. I certainly have things to say about it, is the point. Right. Another user said, I think anarchism should not try to eliminate hierarchies, but to eliminate coercion of individuals by others. Thinking that we should eliminate hierarchies creates a lot of confusion, since there are a lot of them that happen without oppression. For example, a worker may be better at their job than the other. The opinion of a professional in a particular field will be considered higher in a hierarchy than that of someone who isn't. If people like a singer more than another, that will also create a hierarchy. In my opinion, these things, including sexual attraction, shouldn't be addressed, and trying to fix any difference that exists among people cannot be done in the real world practically. Maybe it could be tried, but it's problematic, and I think it would end up very badly. Like, what do we do? Force people to like somebody, or to have sex with people they don't want to? No, obviously not. Yeah, and other comments call this hyper-utopian bullshit. Look, fair enough, maybe. And if it can't be addressed, it can't be addressed. I'm open to that idea. And maybe even asking the question at all is problematic, but I guess I feel there's some merit to it. Another one said, yeah, okay, so there's quite a long string of comments, back and forth here. I think they're worth getting into. Is the natural variation in subjective attractiveness a form of hierarchy? One user says, not in my view. For what people find attractive is influenced by fashion, culture, and external events, and sacrificing other things to pursue it is a choice. And I said, true, but it is a choice made without coercion. No one has the right to anyone else's body, of course, but reproduction with someone you find attractive is important to some people. This desire could be exploited in coercive ways. If there are common traits to attraction, wouldn't that create a power difference between those who possess those traits and those who don't? Mike in the Dirt says there's $200 billion a year industry devoted to persuasion of that most powerful, insidious, diabolical sort. You might call that coercion. I agree. Yeah, advertising is a form of coercion. Not the most aggressive one, but absolutely. The same user responds, that's the reproduction, in response to the reproduction thing, she says, or they say, that's their problem. It's not a necessity. It's not a need. It does not directly make one's life better. It does not make one's life easier. Sure, in today's man culture, being a virgin is a sign of failure, but that's an issue with the culture itself, not directly sex. Sex is a totally normal activity, like walking, playing video games, or skydiving. Some activities are accessible to most people, like reading, but if you're blind, you won't be able to. If you're in a wheelchair, you can't skydive or walk, etc. If no one wants to have sex with you, you can't have sex. Simple. Sad, but nothing you can do to change that. There are many other solo ways to try and fulfill your desires. And in response to my claim that it could be exploited in coercive ways, such as, seems like kind of a slippery slope, which is fair, maybe the way I phrased it there. Very true that I said, very true that it's a want, not a need. Masturbation can be plenty fulfilling. What's more, no one has the right to have sex from anyone else. That being said, I know a lot of people whose decisions regarding attractive people are heavily biased. I consider the warping of choice a form of power, not a formal or institutional form, but power nonetheless. It mostly goes unabused, but in my personal, anecdotal experience, both men and women can cynically manipulate their attractiveness to abuse their partners. More benignly, though, sometimes attractiveness can be used to extract favors from people or to rally social support behind a cause. Perhaps all this is beside the point. There will always be natural variation in human populations, so maybe there is no remedy. But I do think attractiveness, especially in areas less impacted by environment, could potentially create a form of hierarchy. Yeah, I stand by that. I guess I'm sort of reviewing my own posts, which maybe isn't necessary. Okay, so now there's this person I got into a bit of a disagreement, which I would potentially like to skip to. On the other hand, I'm seeing some fascinating comments on the way there, so I'll read them too. We got a person saying, I don't think beauty trends will ever leave, unfortunately. Attractive features will always be part of humanity, in my opinion. Fashion trends have even been observed in chimps. It's like hardwired into us. I think it's like that to build on an internal sense of unity and community, to see others dressing, appearing in a similar way, and those as less appealing. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the study they're referring to, but I see that perspective. Side note, I actually heard about prostitution in chimps, which again, just because something's natural doesn't make it right, obviously. And yeah, I mean, we want to eliminate sex work as, at least in its coercive form that exists now, and in chimps apparently. But it is an interesting topic. Like, to what extent is it built into human psychology, and what is malleable? Most of it's probably malleable, but what percentage, you know? There's someone talking about, okay, a little not safe for work, fair warning. Lock a group of people into a small room, release pheromones that lead to sex. Everyone will end up participating regardless of body shape, showers or growers, innies or outies with women's vaginas, saggy or perky, or man boobs or no man boobs. They will end up fucking. To which I said, I'm not sure pheromones exist per se in humans, but I'm down for orgies in general. I also think people would fuck a much wider range of folks if there weren't pesky social norms. And then we have a long debate about pheromones following up. Which, okay, so they are, this user claims. Tis, or was, what they taught in Basic Health 101 in 7th grade. You know those few days where you go without using deodorant? Then out of nowhere, your significant other lays on top of you demanding snoo if you're male, or they feel horny if you're female. That is your pheromone. In my experience, where I've been less hygienic, I don't seem to attract more people or be more attractive to my SO. Although I guess sometimes, yeah, like workout sweatiness can be attractive. This is getting down a bit of a uncomfortable rabbit hole for YouTube. Not that I want to monetize this channel, but I don't want to get blacklisted either. Let's see. An interesting question. I do think, another user says, it's an interesting one. I do think social and cultural capital have a distortive effect on free interaction, which is often why anarchists who I've heard speak before have suggested that certain kinds of meetings and styles of deliberative decision-making would end up relying on reifying certain kinds of hierarchy. As for how to resolve it, I don't think you can entirely. However, perhaps liberal representative politics could be useful there. There will be some form of media messaging and communications and entertainment in Anarchy, ensuring that it encapsulates wide demographics and includes positive depictions of people from different backgrounds and circumstances could possibly go a long way. I agree. Yeah, clearly so much of this is cultural that just positive representation in media might change a lot. I mean, obviously it's not something you could enforce, but if it's something as a movement we could advocate for, it would be nice. Another user says, an anarchist society isn't a perfect society. In fact, basing social organization on such constant, intensive social interactions as local meetings to decide this, and that inevitably leads to all kinds of conflict and differences and difficulty. Attractiveness is, like everything else, something each of us develops to a greater or lesser extent. This is difference. Just like some people are more charismatic or better at language or maths, you might say some people being better at maths is a kind of hierarchy, but it's not. You're just thinking hierarchically. This capitalist idea being better at something makes one worth more. Instead, think in terms of difference. We're all different, and equal in our difference. Our abilities are unequivocal. The same is true for attraction. Although I disagree with a few of your premises, my general response would be that some people will just be more attractive than others, no matter the specific cultural norms of attractiveness. This is something to be said for encouraging an ethic of seeing the differences of people as attractive, and their very difference. For example, the way big nose or mole or of a lover becomes beautiful in the way that is so specific to them. But I would also say that we must not be too utopian about this all, because the utopian impulse so quickly devolves into a top-down authoritarianism of what is and isn't acceptable, crushing the soul out of our lives. We should remember to love the differences in our lives, the imperfections, and the things that give texture to our short time together on this earth. I think that's very well said. And I agree. A lot of solutions would be too prescriptive and top-down. We have a few shorter comments. Didn't really lead anywhere. And then we had a sort of disagreement that I'm going to comment on a little bit, which, may be unfair, but I do still feel strongly about it. This user says, maybe before you make that video, look up what anarchists mean by hierarchy. I did. Just because someone has symmetrical face or a nice body, those features alone do not subjugate anybody. Lol. Which I was annoyed by. I said, alright, fine. Well, I find your comment a little dismissive, and I have read quite a bit of theory. Hit me up for Cowboy Kropotkin, please. Frankly, you could take the same flippant attitude towards a lot of inequality in the world, and it would be wrong there as well. Attraction from a large group of people definitely constitutes a form of unshifting status or authority, which I sort of maintain that belief. Is it something that can be fixed? I don't know. But it does exist. With all due respect, I find your question to be a bit red-pilly. First, it presupposes that the world is somehow ruled by attractive people. It clearly isn't. Look at your political leadership. Look at the photos of some of the richest people in your country. Of the richest, I assume they mean richest, people in your country. Look who is running your police/army forces. Clearly not the most attractive people in the country. Second, I fully believe you read quite a bit of theory, but what you're proposing seems to be misunderstanding a very fundamental aspect of anarchy, the absence of hierarchies. The point is to have no hierarchies, no institutionalized structures that would allow one group or group of people to decide what other people are supposed to do with their lives. Once that's gone, who cares, presumably, that some people are sexually attractive to a larger group of people than others? In real, I think the red pill, is that what that stands for? Life, that means very little, since there is more to attractiveness than pretty face and voluptuous body. I see you commenting here that attractive people are given preferential treatment or in job interviews, but again, anarchism is anti-work. There wouldn't be job interviews. So my response was, I can see why this question would raise red flags, but I do think you're reading into my post things I didn't say. I didn't claim the power imbalance of attraction would be an institutional hierarchy for one, but that it would be a power imbalance that could lead to an informal hierarchy and complicate consent. Secondly, although the U.S. is most definitely not run by attractive people, the biggest underlying factor is wealth, also, get wrecked, Mitch McConnell, many corporate higher-ups are disproportionately tall and attractive, for example. That's a bit besides the point, though, because I'm talking about a post-formal hierarchy world, post-capitalist. I think we can agree that our current system is quite biased in many ways. What I want to explore is instead, how do the dynamics of attraction work as power? Can that power become coercive or widespread enough to constitute a threat to equality? I mean, look at Bella Delphine with OnlyFans, Tom Cruise with Scientology, and Charles Manson with murder. Obviously, each of these people use their attractiveness towards establishing power over others, although it's vastly different outcomes. Yeah. Shouldn't this be talked about in some way? I hardly think that's the most important issue, but it does constitute an influential power dynamic that I figure anarchy ought to at least acknowledge. Some guy found the with murder part funny, I'm glad. And then they responded to it again, to my statement again. In response to attraction as power, they say, it doesn't. Certainly not anymore, as one's athleticism or mathematical talent can be considered coercive. The idea that men are absolutely helpless when they see beautiful women, and vice versa, is a Hollywood invention. You can be sexually attracted to somebody and still go on with your life unaffected by your attraction to the other person. I really struggle to see your reasoning here. And then with the examples I gave, she said, I don't know who the first person is. How did Tom Cruise's attractiveness as opposed to his celebrity clout help him climb up the ranks of the Scientology Church? And how is he in the Scientology Church in any way relevant to anarchism? Finally, in what world is Charles Manson considered to be attractive? Charisma is a different category to attractiveness. Fair. And a very strong counter-argument to your thesis. I mean, I would say they are, I guess, intersectional to sort of, I don't know if that's quite using the term quite right, but they are definitely interlinked, and I don't think they're entirely separate. Charisma is, you're more likely to find someone charismatic if they possess a lot of culturally normative, attractive traits, at least within our current system, which may change in Anarchy. In response to shouldn't this be talked about in some way, I hardly think it's the most important issue, but it does constitute an influential power dynamic that I figure Anarchy ought to at least acknowledge, to which they say, well, if you've got a sense that this is not talked about, then I suggest that you look into feminism. What you'll find there is that the idea of attractiveness was invented not to empower women, but to subjugate them. It's the very opposite of what you're trying to argue. Listen, do your own thing, and I wish you all the best with it, but in my ignorant opinion, and as gently as I can, I would say you're thinking about this issue as muddled. Alright, so I'd just like to respond to this last part of it. So, for one, this is not an exclusively like men to women thing. I think this is something that does apply to attractive men with attraction from other men and attraction from women. I mean, I guess I've seen it a lot in abusive relationships where, I mean, I guess in some ways the problematic thing is the abuse itself, right? And the hierarchy implicit there. But that hierarchy is often exacerbated by these standards of attraction. I think is fair to say, right? Like, a lot of girls I know go back to guys who are bad for them, on again, off again type thing, even though, like, they know, like, they're bad for their mental health and, like, low-key abusive, because they find them hot. But at the end of the day, that's more of a personal preference thing and sort of its own separate issue, and maybe not something that really would be addressed by anarchism, because it's like a one-on-one relationship issue, and it's also just sort of a separate thing that anarchism would be against, regardless, in abusive relationships. But, however, I'm sort of more talking about, like, the dynamic of you being found attractive to a lot of people, and how that influences that group of people's decision making, and how that can constitute a form of unshifting power. Which is sort of what I go into with those examples. Granted, a lot of those examples involve very hierarchical systems. The cult with Tom Cruise, Charles Manson with murder and sort of his female fans who were sort of infamously sort of cheering for his release. Bella Delphine with OnlyFans selling bathwater is the meme, but quite successfully. I mean, essentially, some of this is just sort of the existence of sex work. It raises questions, right? Like, in our society, I would say it is coercive to exchange money for attraction in any way, obviously, right? Because we live in a society in which to survive you need money, and so it is essentially equivalent to having a gun to someone's head. It's not you doing it, but it's definitely sort of inherently, implicitly coercive in a lot of ways. Doesn't mean I'm against sex work. Sex workers need to be supported, but sex as work probably would not be a thing within anarchy. But that's sort of what I'm talking about, right? Like, the fact that people are sometimes willing to trade away things that they might need to live for just attention or feelings of sexual attraction from someone they are really into, to me can kind of pose a threat to a society that's attempting to minimize hierarchy wherever it can. And I think any solution to that would most likely be social, cultural, that sort of thing. If indeed it could be solved while respecting people's like individuality enough. But I do think all those examples are applicable. Tom Cruise, granted, like a lot of his ascension in the cult of Scientology has to do with his wealth, but I would say he brings up another related topic, which is actors in general. I think Tom Cruise actually, funnily enough, came up in a previous comment, where, yeah, I mean, a lot of celebrities are very conventionally attractive, and it has led them to obtain quite a lot of wealth. Arguably not a ton of power, but still, I mean, it's not on the same level as like billionaires and the political power wielded by congressmen, but it's significant, I would say. And thankfully, a lot of them seem to at least be liberal, so most of them aren't pushing for fash stuff. So in that case, it's not so bad. At least it's a hierarchy that is being used to push the dialogue left. But I would argue that in a lot of cases, for example, when acting is a capitalist industry, your ranking in it can definitely have something to do with your attractiveness. And it does make me wonder, like, in a society, even without the formal strictures of capitalism and neoliberalism, will there still remain some, like, I don't know, people who are really willing to sacrifice parts of their free will and individuality and resources and all that stuff to people they find very attractive? That might be fine if it's their choice, but is it 100% their choice if, like, for example, being that person's partner would give them sort of an informal status? Just being associated with that person might give them status. If that person themselves possesses a lot of status and can change things in that person's favor, a lot of this sort of just boils down to, like, you hope people aren't dicks about it. And I do think because so much of anarchy is based on mutual aid, that is a reasonable hope to have. But it seems like a very relevant topic. And as for the last point, you should look into feminism. I have. I'm not the most literate on it, but my mom was a third wave feminist. I personally consider myself fourth wave, at least as far as I understand it. I think where this user is coming from is from a perspective of third wave feminism generally, which I, again, could be wrong about. But the whole attractiveness was invented not to empower women, but to subjugate them. For sure, there's an element of beauty standards that is meant to subjugate women, no doubt. In response to the last point, I think we're actually in agreement here, and what she's stating, that attractiveness was invented not to empower women but to subjugate them, is generally in agreement with my point. Because, first off, it does not just affect women, but yeah, in as much as it does affect women, it disproportionately affects them, and beauty standards are awful for women. And that's kind of what I'm saying. Isn't there something about sexual attraction that is troubling? Or just the way it changes the power dynamics between people? Not that it necessarily has to be done away with, but, like, can it be addressed, and how? And so I guess my conclusion is that last part is just sort of a dig with the assumption that, like, I am some men's rights activist, incel, essentially, who is saying this boo-hoo, poor men, they can't have sex with hot women. Not what I'm saying. And it's a vibe I also got from the first part, which it strikes me as a third wave feminism thing, which, again, in my understanding, is less about gender abolition and more about sort of what I feel sometimes is like a war between the sexes type thing. I hear a lot of rad femmes from third wave say stuff like kill all men, which I don't think is it's one of those slogans that I don't think is optically useful. I get where it's coming from. I get the anger, and honestly, it's fair. But it's also like, unlike stuff like Black Lives Matter, it's not something you can explain to someone who's less radicalized and be like, oh, well, you see, it's just that, like, as of now, Black lives don't matter. Shouldn't they? But with Kill All Men, like, you can't, it's kind of just kill all men. It's kind of just hostility, at least in my understanding. And, again, justified. But I think a better position is that gender ought to be abolished, because that's the social aspect of it. And in some ways, I see this as actually very progressive. And it's a vibe I also got from the first part of this post, where she assumed it was like men being insatiably attracted to women, when that's not what I specified. In fact, I talked about how guys and gals, it applies not necessarily equally, but it does apply to both. And yeah, so I just strongly disagree with this last part. But anyway, that's a run through most of the comments. There's one bad faith guy who is like a post-leftist who I don't really think is worth bringing up. And someone who thinks the standards of beauty don't exist. There is another interesting, quite long take that I think might be worth bringing up. I don't have unique ideas in this, but I feel like working to divest the power that people think is inherent, as in they were born with it, able-bodied and attractive people, and treating it as a societal issue might help. Totally agree. Because of those who are conventionally attractive are given the halo effect because of their current symbiosis between personal attractions and what media and culture says attractive, and those disproportionately affect each other, right? The solution doesn't lie in preventing people from being attracted to whomever. I don't personally think it's any one person's problem or fault, per se. It's in preventing people or a society from assigning power / virtuosity / etc. to those attributes. Psychologists can say whether this is an uphill battle, though. And if by that point we've managed to disassemble some of the current systems that influence people to believe the attractive are more deserving or competent, more able, which I think is really capitalistic thinking, then I think we'd be well on our way there already. Like I said, I don't have unique ideas or solutions. I just don't think this is an issue with personal attraction. I would even begin to think that the variation in personal attractiveness constitutes a hierarchy. I wouldn't even begin to think the variation in personal attractiveness constitutes a hierarchy if we're able to rewrite what being attractive means beyond looks and prevent it from skewing a person's outcomes societally and systemically as well. Yeah, so I do think if parts of the culture of attraction change, a lot of this will become less problematic, absolutely. Well said. Okay, now for the bonus part, which is a totally separate post I made, but it just so happened to have a very insightful comment in response to it that was about sex work, and I just sort of wanted to share, which I thought was great. Here we are. It's loading. Okay. This user says, real response to this. I'd love to discuss this. I don't inherently have a problem with casual sex or sex. Okay, actually, I should explain the meme I posted first, right? It's a picture of two attractive women because 196 is terminally horny. And it says, if you believe that sex work is selling your body and manual labor isn't, then your views have been corrupted by your moralistic views on sex. Stand by that. So they say, real response to this, I'd love to discuss this. I don't inherently have a problem with casual sex or sex with strangers. I have a problem with how financial incentive, in my opinion, and from what I've observed, complicates consent. And thus, I have a moralistic apprehension to sex work, at least in the current American economy. Would a sex worker still be a sex worker? Could they make just as much money in another job? In other words, is sex work sometimes motivated by financial rather than 'cause I want to motivations? I'm compelled to believe that this definitely happens a lot. Consent is an incredibly complicated topic. And I've learned throughout my life that a simple yes is not consent. Many aspects play into consent. For example, conveniently leaving out details of yourself while having sex with a partner, in my opinion, damages the strength of a consent. While there are many other examples of this, I will stick with the one to seg into my main point, which is that financial incentive seems to me to be an agent that complicates consent, and that is why I have a problem with it. The counter-argument would be, so you're okay with manual labor but not sex work, as described in this post. Well, in fact, I'm not sure. As there are no social aspect of consent to manual labor that I can think of. Should there be? I think definitely. I also think there would be a lot of modern work practices that I would deem complicates consent, just as the financial aspect of sex clouds consent in my eyes. Thank you for listening. I love philosophy, and I jump at any chance to talk about this. If I'm a dumbass, please let me know, and if I'm onto something, please let me know, smiley face. I think they're onto something. I told them so. I love it. I actually have a very similar take myself. Sex work is a little rapey, to be quite honest, but the workers themselves deserve support regardless until we overthrow capitalism. Money creates a power imbalance that definitely complicates consent. It definitely wouldn't be work in an anarcho-communist society unless it's like voluntary sex therapy or something, because no one would be motivated to have sex with people they otherwise wouldn't. Exactly my thoughts too. I think it's crazy how class/wealth imbalance has Okay, so my final thoughts on this. I am a privileged white dude. Maybe I should just shut the fuck up about this.
Your right to property is antithetical to Christ. Hey, the time is right, so if you got something to prove, so a fucking yellow and black triangle flag on your verse. I'd like to make a living kissing handcaps. See, I'm an animated and this main picture of Batman. The hammer of logic, identity, admonished, anonymous, a topic, a market, and some fluffy handcuffs.